Okay. Woo! We are live. So welcome, Regan Good. Thank you for making the time today to talk to me. We have a conversation planned to discuss some of your recent work, to discuss the needle and some other things. But I do have to say, I've enjoyed every conversation I've ever had with you. And what I enjoy about our conversations is that, in general, they just turn into these freewheeling events and cover all sorts of things that are interesting to me personally. So I've got questions for you about your work, and I hope that you can, give us a lot of information about your work. But anyway, I've been looking forward to this conversation all day. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And I, of course, have, I met you my freshman year at Colby College, and you were a very special person to me. And I felt like we had conversations that went to the heart of the matter almost immediately every time we met. It makes sense.
I would define it that way also, that we sort of were able to cut to the chase, even as youngsters. And so speaking of cutting to the chase, well, actually, before we get into your work, so you are in New York right now. How's New York today?
Today, it's almost like any other Wednesday, except, of course, we all know what has happened, and now we also know what's happening. So, we're January 20th. It's going to explode again around here. The joy was palpable, totally palpable. Honking horns, dancing people. So I think we're on the mend here.
Yeah. So, and are you guys on a lockdown right now, or can you come and go as you please?
We can come and go as we please. We just have to obviously be safe and wear masks and do the hand sanitizer. Initially during lockdown, we just, we didn't know what was happening. So I basically kind of froze in my bed for like the first 3 months, just sort of stuck on news and just trying to figure out what the heck this was. And I imagined COVID for some reason as saffron, like that the whole world was covered with strings of saffron. I don't know why. And I was like, I better not go out there. And at a certain point, I just, the things relaxed a bit, and I got a little more brave, and I finally just, I will go anywhere now, but I'm not using public transportation. I have to say that's still a little spooky.
Yeah. That's an interesting image that you have, saffron, which is this sort of hairy.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that before, but it's
like a little worm out there that just covered everything,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because we are certainly not the first, culture or era to deal with a massive fear on one level and disease on another level. These things are as old as the hills. They're older than us. I mean, we are made of, viruses are part of our natural history. And so we've had these battles going on for a long time. But I think that we've gotten away, that we are able to be well for longer lives, right? So I think that we, for a while, thought we had this whole thing covered, that it wasn't, and so people are shocked.
Right, that we are porous, permeable, that this can happen to us. It's important that we remember that nature touches us. I mean, for God's sake, we are nature, right?
Exactly.
I think we're so far from it. At least I am, and living in Brooklyn, and I've lived here for 25 years now. Yeah. And really desperately at this point missing nature. I try to tell my students, like, don't write like, Mother Nature or this and that, because you don't want to like cheapen the idea of a connection literally with nature. They're often writing about my connection with nature, and I'm like, oh, think about it more deeply than that. Not only are you are nature, And yet we are so surrounded by the man-made, and which I love, and I love, but I ended up having to discover the excuse me, the wild weeds that were growing on the sidewalk in our neighborhood to be able to feel connected at this point when I was just desperate to touch something living. I would look out on our street, and it was dead as a doornail. Nothing was happening, and felt like I was sort of shriveling inside. And man, I walked outside with this powerful app called Picture This, and the next thing I knew, I was very obsessed. And
so how does Picture This work?
It's easy. I mean, I hate technology and I hate all apps. All you do is you walk around, you take a picture of whatever weed or plant you want to identify. It sucks it up and then it identifies it. My friend Tom Thompson doesn't like this app exactly because he says it's too confident. So sometimes it will make a mistake, but you begin to feel when it's making a mistake. Okay. And it's just incredible. And I have found over 90 different plants, and these are not garden plants that have escaped gardens. These are simply weeds.
Yeah, growing in the concrete and in the fences and
doing what they do. And it's like, seriously, that's the green fuse of life. This wonderful French landscaper. What is his name? Is it Gilles Clement? I don't remember know how to pronounce it, but he talks about plants being the emissaries of life, which is so beautiful. And he makes really no distinction between weeds and plants. Like a dandelion is as worthwhile as a rose to him, and he encourages us to accept weeds, to encourage them to grow in lots, to encourage this life that we are really quite blind to. There is this thing called plant blindness, which was identified in the early 90s, I think, which is really quite true. I have walked around this city for 25 years, sort of aware that I did not know what was going on and always feeling slightly confused by it. Like I always knew, like one day I'll figure out what these plants are. Yeah. But I'm too busy surviving. I can't now. And then when I had this little leisure time, it's really changed. It's changed the city for me.
That's cool. So do you have any favorite weeds?
Oh, yes, totally. So lemon balm is a freaking miracle on the streets. I don't know if anyone knows what lemon balm is, but it's like a mint. And there was, it was my second plant, I think, or third. And, I took a picture of it and I was like, lemon balm, interesting, and they said, you can break it open and blah, blah, blah. This rather disgusting, diesel-y, dirty, garbage infested tree bed had this freaking lemon balm plant. And I broke open the thing. And that was it. That was, that was the entry, like a portal into this world. That smell, this natural, insane, intense, transportative smell. I thought, my God, it's growing at my feet.
So is there a reason why weeds are called weeds? Like, is there a difference between weeds and non-weeds, or is that just man-made completely?
That is man-made. There's a lot of very interesting nomenclature that goes on in the world of plants, right? So, weeds are considered invaders, they're other, they're not indigenous, they are, they're out to choke and strangle and take over, which is really interesting. I find many weeds just really beautiful, right? And I'm like, fine, take over. You want to take over? Take over.
Often weeds have smaller flowers, or the weeds that I'm aware of have small flowers. When we first moved into our house in Chicago, there were all these flowers in the backyard, and I was like, I'm going to replant them into the front yard. So I did all this replanting. Somebody took a year that I replanted all the weeds. It's like, I like them, but I
Well, I've been collecting like weed bouquets on the weekends. It's very strange to be walking around a city environment. I mean,
yeah.
Brooklyn has always been bucolic. It was always known as the bucolic borough.
Oh,
And a lot of the fencing around Brooklyn has sort of trident grape clusters, like the arrows are really grape clusters, sort of, reflecting this other place that Brooklyn was.
yeah.
And it's sort of it's a sort of a hazy zone here. We're not, thank God, we're not on Fifth Avenue, where all of those plants are planted, they're bought, cared for, planted. I am not interested in those plants. And it becomes a sort of like, it sort of reflects my interest in the world. I am really not interested in the people who live on Fifth Avenue. I'm just not. Sorry. You might be wonderful, but I'm not going to go to you first. I'm really more interested in the things that struggle and survive. Obviously that's the more interesting activity.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's the interesting thing about cities is that we absolutely have both, and we have more and more cities are more and more for the wealthy and the cared for, and the things that really make it interesting get pushed into the cracks and get pushed into the places.
I mean, I think, artists have always lived in the cracks and always lived in the, the industrial spaces. And I love that about artists, and artists are like weeds in that way. We make do with a lot of things that other people just would, just find anathema. They couldn't handle, money insecurity and all of those kinds of things that come along with it.
Yeah. But you mentioned earlier, speaking of money insecurity, you mentioned earlier teaching, which I have done throughout the years, a lot of teaching also as a way to make ends meet, and also as a way to do something that is interesting, and to keep the whole thing going. So you are currently teaching now, isn't that right?
Yes, I started teaching maybe 7 years ago, and I'm teaching now at Pratt. I'm teaching writing in the architecture program to freshmen, which is really, it's the best job I've ever had. It is so wonderful to be, these are kids that actually make things. They know things that I'm surprised they know. Good parenting has gone on there. They're curious, they're open, and in this realm of architecture, you can really talk about anything you want with them. You can talk about anything, because really architecture connects with everything. And it's very rewarding to open their minds that are, just thinking about things like, how does the building interact with the ground? It's sort of more blindness for me that's being shed. We do have sort of building blindness too, right? They're just buildings. They're just things that we're in, and we go out of them, and then we go into other ones.
Yeah.
But huge amount of thoughts go into unless you're building a Pizza Hut, right? Huge amount of artistic thought goes into building, and to see it all feed in is really beautiful. Oh, and I just introduced some to Andy Goldsworthy's work.
Oh, excellent. He's number one. Yeah, totally cool.
Oh, Rivers and Tides. What is it? He's, it's the vernacular too. It's the making art in the place and from that landscape, just absolutely the tools of that place making the thing.
Do you do that? Is that what you're doing?
That's a really interesting question. I think I am at some level. I do. In so much as that I want my work to be vernacular from my life. It's interesting, actually. Or possibly only to me. But when I started writing, when I got to Iowa, let's say, my impulse was to not lie about anything. That seemed very important to me. It mattered not at all to any of my peers. That, like, to invent situations to me seemed, I wasn't sure what the meaning of that would be. And so I try to have my poems really come out of my life and looking at my life, which is not important at all, except to me. You know, but I think that is, especially in this last book, the Needle, because there's so much about this, about Westport and the landscape I grew up in, and our backyard, literally. We had this every spring, this sort of flooded place would happen at the bottom of the lawn, and we would freeze, we would ice skate on it, but I come back to this marshy place in the lawn again and again, and I end up entering that place and coming back with poems. So it's very, very evocative to me. The vegetation of Westport, freaking Connecticut. You know, that's where I grew up.
So exactly. So it is this real place, these real memories. It's like you are going in like a geologist, right? But it's still the transformational event of writing the poems takes you somewhere else.
Exactly, because you don't want to stay with your memories or your childhood, right? You don't want to, stay in that memory. You want to open it up and hopefully connect it to your adult life, so that you can see some kind of shape. I mean, maybe it's the dream, as Jory Graham wrote, the dream of the unified field. Perhaps this is a dream. But it seems a worthy dream for me to, it gives my life more meaning. If I didn't have it, I really don't know what I would make of life. I don't know what I would, if I had more interest in other kinds of pursuits, I might feel very differently about the world and my childhood home.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm super cathected to it because I'm also reading The Poetics of Space right now. My students and I are reading that. Beautiful book.
What's it called? The
Poetics of Space. This is what happens when you teach too many classes and you never know where the freaking books are. Anyway, but talking about home, right? Especially the home and the house as both your habitat, but also your sort of cabinet of wonders, your the place where you learn to dream your life.
Yeah.
I mean, that is sort of the major insight of this book, is that really the home is where you daydream your life, which is so incredible to think about.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that when you go into a space, as a creative act, like for me, it's songwriting or writing short stories, but you go into the space, often for me, it is the home, but you wander around and you come out with something you didn't know about before. I mean,
that's it, Hannah.
Go ahead.
That's it. I mean, it seems simple now that when you uncover it, but really, I always tell my poetry students, you cannot know what you're going to say. If the poem is dead on arrival, you've already failed. The joy and the privilege of being a poet, or learning the skills to dive into the world and come out with something else, right? That's the key. I'm not interested in you making a tidy little poem. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested actually in watching you do something really strange to yourself, where you surprise yourself, you surprise me. I mean, I had a student last night, write something about the flowers are yellow, the night sky is black as a bee. I couldn't believe it. That is incredibly beautiful. And I said to her, I will go out tonight if I leave the house, and I will think of this. I will think of, the yellow and black that you've shown me.
I was thinking about this today. That is exactly the thing. Because I was thinking about the difference between writing songs and writing poetry, which is very different activities with very different output.
Yeah.
It happens differently and it's different purposes. And I think the thing about poetry, the thing about songwriting, I think, is that you're aiming for a fresh emotional take on something. You're aiming for a new emotion, a new emotional take. Like, wow, it's the same story.
For you.
Yeah. And I think with poetry, it's a new truth.
Well, that's so interesting that you say that, because I was thinking this morning, it's like poets are kind of are like scientists discovering truths for themselves, This is my universe. This is my scientific universe, and my student, that's her scientific universe, where she sees some correlation between night sky, yellow flowers, and bees.
Yeah.
Then who are we to delve into that and figure out why she did that? Who cares? It's the mystery of looking and existing, really, that brought her there and gave us that image.
And I think that and then that exactly that giving the image, giving the thing, and when you are receiving the gift of it, you have more information about reality, like forever, like what you said. Think of that. And so just like science builds, ideas build, there's proof, or they prove it again and they add to the proof, or they disprove it. We are doing the same with images and experiences.
Totally. I really believe it. I believe the best poems are like that.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking, sort of not taking turns, but scientifically building. Yeah.
I mean, right. I have to think about it. We all have to think about it if we're artists. What am I doing? Where is this going? I've been writing since I was 6 years old, and it's been a long haul. It's not been an easy life. But again, these are sort of maps, right, of my thinking and my life. Again, who would care but me? I don't really know. But I'm really interested in making actual meaning. And again, I said when we started talking that my interest sort of at Iowa, what I was concerned about was sort of invention and what I considered lying, or the harsh young lady, young poet lady thing to think. But I was very severe. I was not fucking around, at Iowa. I was like, I am not interested in funny poems or ironic poems or anything like that, and my peers were like, this is really great. And I was like, I'm not so sure about that. So it's been a rather lonely journey, but otherwise I would be making work that was totally alien to myself, and I just can't do it. And I believe maybe in a 19th century way of looking at the world, or a 19th century way of building metaphor that is not really happening in 21st century work, which moves very quickly. Some of it gorgeous, but the images are dealt with very quickly, right?
Yeah.
We're in sort of the 19th century, and like the images you'd go like down, like there's almost no bottom, and those are the kind of images that really excite me.
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned that you began writing poetry when you're 6 years old.
Yeah,
your mom was a poet.
She was. My mother was a poet. She never had a book published. She was a very good poet, though. She had been born in Flatbush, Brooklyn. She was a poor Protestant girl who went to NYU at night and studied with Stanley Kunitz. And I found in her papers she had written like a fan letter to Rudyard Kipling. And he wrote back saying, like, young woman, like, your words startle me and scare me a little, and I was like, oh my God, I've startled and scared people for years. And now I see where I got it. a little too much enthusiasm and love for these people, but she was a poet and definitely was. My father was a journalist, so we had sort of the two, binary writing minds, the imagination and the factual. And I cleaved to my mother for many reasons,
Yeah.
as you can imagine. But as a child, the more the imagination was where I would live with her. And she read me poems very early. She read me Bishop. She read Lowell. She read no Berryman, actually. But I found she had a ton of Berryman. After she died, I found all of her Berryman books. But I was I was asked to look at the world closely at a young age. And I think I must have heard my mother say that's what a poet is. A poet looks at the world closely.
Yeah.
Look at how Elizabeth Bishop is looking at the doily in this dirty Sunoco station, or Sunoco station, I think it was. I just lost my train of thought because I went
closely, which again, goes back to sort of being the scientist of your own world. I mean, that is what we are doing. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned your mother. You cleaved to your mother. She gave you the world of imagination. She sort of she introduced you to these great poets, and poetry was around you while your father was off doing. He was a journalist. He was doing very important work. And he was the factual guy.
Yeah.
Are you like your dad at all?
Am I what?
Are you also the factual poet? Do you find a relationship to his work?
I'm split down the middle. I really am a very loyal child. I am literally split between the two of them. I do write nonfiction. I'm not a journalist. I've done some journalism, but it's always just been like, I felt like a fraud. No, my dad was an important journalist during the civil rights movement. And so, news and events, very important to our household. Yeah. But I have to say, I can't mix the two. I can be funny, for example, in my prose. I am not funny in my, although sometimes people are like, I love that poem. It was so funny. And I'm like, oh God.
That's funny.
If you're reading that as a funny poem, you must think I suck. Yeah, so I definitely have this factual, we all probably have a factual brain where I'm like my dad out in the street, like, what is this weed? How did this weed get here? Yeah. But that's also my mom, with her wildflowers of, so I guess there is some overlap there with her, guide to wildflowers or whatever, which was always open. When we looked at books to learn things. But now we've got this app. But I mean, I do write nonfiction, and I've written a memoir about the family. I've written about my father's work a lot. Yeah. And but my mother has gotten sort of short shrift in any writing about the family, which is mysterious to me and also not mysterious to me. I think if I begin to write about her, then the wheels might really come off,
Yeah. So maybe that is to come, not the wheels coming off, but maybe writing about your father was the first delve in.
It's not like I haven't been thinking about my father every day for my entire life. Right. I remember when my mother said to me, I pass this on to my students sometimes. My mother said, well, Regan, the first man you love is your father. And I was like, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that. I found it so terrifying. My dad was a formidable man, and he was, he had a lot of anger from his own life, but also because of his journalistic beat. I mean, he was really seeing some of the ugliest things you can imagine, right, in 64 and 65. So now again, I've lost my train of thought.
So can you give some specific examples, like where your father was specifically? Like
Sure.
you'd be at home with your mom, you'd be at home, you know, going to school, whatever, and he would be out in the fields.
Sure. So I was born in '67, so after, you know, the major events of the civil rights movement. But he was really everywhere. He was, and I have lots of pictures of him that I've found of him in the field, at Selma, at various speeches, from various courthouses. He was the ABC bureau chief for Atlanta during those years. But when I was cognizant of, you know, of where he would go in the early '70s, this was still his beat. His beat was still, he was now a freelancer, and his beat was still African-American poor, rural poor, white poor. He really was looking into job, you know, for example, I was going to say job safety. I remember vividly him coming back from Florida one trip and bringing me sugarcane that he had, a big sugarcane he'd broken and put in his suitcase, because he had gone to report on, you know, sugarcane laborers who were hacking themselves to freaking death with these horrifying knives. So that's one memory I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'll tell you another thing. Actually, in high school, I was going through his papers one day. Oops, and a photograph fell out of a man named Donald, and I want to say, I'm not going to remember his name, which is terrible, but it was a picture of the last African-American man hung in Atlanta. He had been lynched, and it was something like 1981.
Oh my God.
It's quite an insane story. But I definitely remember that picture falling out, and it was a picture that a photographer had to have given my father. This wasn't, you know, wasn't cut out of a newspaper. It's about this big, and I came across it a couple of years ago and remembered that memory and the picture.
Yeah. So America, and we're still dealing with these narratives, with this history that we're not dealing with. The not dealing is something that we are having to deal with.
Look at it. I mean, you know, my father always said, he wasn't the only one to say it, that you know, slavery is America's issue. It is our fucking issue. And I mean, let alone Indian genocide.
Yeah.
I don't, you know, I'm sure state making isn't pretty anywhere. This seems to be especially ugly.
You're sure, what did you say? You're sure what isn't pretty anywhere?
State making, you know, making state building, making countries, making, you know, boundaries. This is just, it's such an ugly story. And then it's covered over with such really insane gloss, you know, that America's everybody's friend, that everyone has a fair shake here. It's just not true. It's never been true, ever, not for once, not from the second they came here.
Yeah.
It was, you know, they brought over hierarchy. There's hierarchy all over this place.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can't know ourselves unless we're honest with ourselves about that. And we're just not, you know, we're just not. We can't take it. Why can't we?
I think part of it is that the narratives that get sold are simple so they can be sold. So we learn in school, and people are talking about a very simple narrative. And I don't mean just like the history of what happened, but like you mentioned hierarchies. America is filled with super complex and many hierarchies all over the place. There's so many different things going on, so many different histories. And then this idea that you're supposed to get over stuff. Get over it. Like, you know,
well, I'm
a slave owner and you weren't a slave. Get over it. Like, and you know, the way that people get treated, like, you know, you're just supposed to not feel, not have a history, not have a family history. You're supposed to be happy for the crumbs you're given, and shut up. I mean, I think that is that's part of our culture, is to shut up. You're supposed to. What? Okay.
Well, especially if you're,
What a big, great
I don't want to be a big drag, but especially if you're a woman or a minority,
Yeah,
I mean, I've had students say things like that, in class, like, oh, slavery ended, 400 years ago. What's the big deal? Can't they get over it? And I'm like, oh, ooh. And that's where being a teacher is sort of tricky. You end up I'm like, am I teaching you morality too? I don't know if I'm supposed to, but
it's always an opportunity. I think anything that gets said that is wrong or troublesome is always an opportunity to at least plant an acorn. No matter what the topic is, no matter what they say, if it's in your classroom.
I mean, I agree. And there is a weird thing I find I do in class, not so much now at Barnard and Pratt, but at some other places where I've taught, where I'm kind of like, okay, you want to be like magnanimous to all views, so you don't offend anybody, but like,
yeah,
I'm like, hi, so I'm sorry if there are any racists in the class. I'm just, here's the other side. Just going to talk about it.
Yeah.
But you're like, there are moments where I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think especially, so I've been out of the country for the past 15 years, and in those 15 years, things have really, really changed. I think especially like in classrooms and outside of classrooms. But in classrooms, my understanding is you really have to rein it in, that students complain quickly.
There's that fear that they're going to complain. I had a student last night in my creative writing class where I was like, uh-oh. Because we were all talking about how freaking happy we were. He was very like not responding, and I thought,
a hard moment, but that
what am I going to do? I can't really pander to racism and violence and this other view of how to behave.
Right. So let's see. Let me just double check my notes for our call. So teaching me. Oh, so there's still so many more things to discuss. So one thing I did want to mention is photography. And so we did talk about your current interest in identifying plants with the app on your phone, which is very cool. And you're posting those to Facebook and it's fun to watch. But you've done some really beautiful, what I consider photojournalism of photographs I think just in Brooklyn, of murals.
Yeah.
Want to talk about that?
Sure. I love taking pictures. I'm a terrible photographer. I'm a photographer. It's just my phone, so I feel a little bit like a fraud, but I'm just snapping images. And Bed-Stuy is my habitat now, my landscape. And I am, I try to be one with it, as much as a white woman can, living in a predominantly and historically Black neighborhood. And there are many things about this neighborhood I find very moving, and really it functions very different than many white neighborhoods I've lived in. And one of the things that's very special about this area are the urban gravestones, they're called. And these are murals of people who have died. Usually, predominantly, they were painted maybe 20, 25 years ago, and they're of young Black men who died. Often you don't know how they died. One suspects how they died. And I saw them immediately when I first got here, and I began to take pictures of them. You see where people will leave bottles of alcohol and fried chicken and letters and notes under these murals. Decades later, people are still, these murals were important. They're still, they're grave markers. And there is a long, ancient history of ancient burial portraiture, really all the way back to like Jericho. honestly, where they would take skulls and reflesh them with clay, you know, to keep the dead near, to keep that memory of the dead near. So like ancient practices are happening under our feet here. And you know, these they're almost, they're like border markers as well. And they're memory images. And you know, I think we're really very detached from even 10 years ago. You know, we just barrel through time. And to look back and to think about what Bed-Stuy was, young Black men were being killed on every corner. You know, and the thing is that sometimes I walk by a mural I've been photographing and looking at for 2 or 3 years, and it's gone. Overnight, they will disappear after being there for, you know, 20 years. Somebody will buy the building. Somebody will decide to sell the building and think, oh, nobody wants this mural on the building. And I'm like, oh my God, that is what we want on the building. You know, but there's no way to protect these things because it's private building owners, and, you know, buildings change hands, people, whatever. So they're both, you know, they're brief as our lives. But the one what we lost here in Bed-Stuy that was the biggest loss and really hurt a lot was a amazing mural that had maybe 37 disembodied heads of various people in the community who had died: a bus driver, a soldier, a little girl, 4 or 5 years old. It was exquisite. It was a masterpiece, literally. And it was in a sylvan scene. There was like the river Styx flowing. There was trees. There were grave marker. It was exquisite. And
do you know who the artist is?
I do. I do have the name. I've photographed the name. But I one night I was in the restaurant across the street and I was looking and I was like, oh, that's weird. It's gone. Oh, and your brain just goes like, zzz, trying to make sense of what's going on. And I thought, oh, no, it's fine. It's still there. They just roll the bricks up at night. That's what, as if it were like a gate, right? I was like, no, it's still there. They roll that up. No. So I go back the next day. The whole thing had just been obliterated, like sandblasted off forever and ever.
Yeah.
So
that is a heartbreaker. Such
a heartbreaker.
So you mentioned archaeology and Jericho and the skulls that they recreate. So the phase to stay closer to the dead. So you are interested in archaeology and things in the ground and things we pull up from the ground. Are you not? I am. So I wish I'd been an archaeologist. I swear to God, I remember thinking about this when I was little, like little-ish, you know, oh, I want to be an archaeologist, but how do they make money? So I was like, I know, I'll become a poet. Oh wait, I can fix that. I'll be a poet instead. So how did you become interested in archaeology in your adult life? Did you sort of rediscover it? I did. I rediscovered it. I think I've tried to trace this. I think that maybe it started when I went to Italy. I mean, I'd been to Italy, but we went back a couple of years ago, and I noticed that I was really taking a lot of pictures of drains, like just ancient drains. Drains. Like, you know, like, because Rome is filled with crazy fountains, right? So there's all these drains in the streets and drains. Drain. So, you know, people were like, that looks like a fun trip. Because I was like, and Andrew was like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, what? So I was so in love with this. So when we got back to Brooklyn, I was like, oh, you know, in Rome, you're literally sort of inside a 2,000-year-old sandwich, right? I mean, there are places in Rome where you can literally walk down through history through a staircase, like right at the Basilica di San Clemente, especially. That's a very special place. But so I came back to New York and I was like, I'm freaking dying.
I'm dying here. I'm just living on the shallow crust of contemporary life. And I started to look down again. I started to look for drains, and I ended up sort of becoming really interested in manhole covers and drains from the 1800s that were still in situ, you know, in New York City streets that I was walking over every day. Totally, you know, also coal chute covers, little gas handheld covers in the sidewalk, embedded in the sidewalk. So this kind of, you know, then you start putting things together. You're like, oh, this is an interesting sort of trace of American energy use, right? Like, oh, first the coal chute, you know, and then the gas, and then the fuel lines, and they all have these exquisite sort of iron caps that were, many of them produced in America, many of them produced in New York itself. So many of the covers will have the names of foundries, you know, and the address. But all of that activity is gone from, you know, this area. We don't have iron smelting pits or anything anymore. But so I think that was it. And then I met someone actually who lived in Orkney, and I had not heard of Orkney. And Orkney these are the most northern islands on the top of Scotland. And I was just thinking of it this morning, meeting this man who's also a poet who lived in Orkney, and them saying the word Orkney, like, oh, well, I met his son. My dad lives in Orkney, and we were always like, what? You know, where? We could not figure out what they were saying. And finally I figured it out. And that was it. I just lost myself to the Neolithic. That is a completely Neolithic landscape that is still alive and weirdly functioning. Yes, there are tourists in it now, but the stuff that was going on up in Orkney in, you know, 5,000, 6,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Totally fascinating. And most fascinating possibly of all are the burial practices. And that's, if I had been an archaeologist, that would have been the specialty, burial practices. Because what is more intimate and revelatory about a people than how they bury their dead? There's nothing, you know. And I think now, look at us now, the way we deal with the dead.
How do we?
We don't know how to at all.
We don't. Yeah.
Like Emily Dickinson, they knew exactly what to do, right? When my mother died, I was looking through the freaking yellow pages. Like I had what do you do when there's literally, I'm sorry to say this, when there's a dead body in your house? Yeah. We have no clue. We are so winnowed away from all of that stuff.
And we don't have the community that surrounds the beginnings and the endings. I mean, I think in you know, very recent times, you knew who your midwife was. You knew who your priest or whatever you needed. You know, you had, and then you had all these people, and you knew them by name, and they knew your family. And so it wasn't you didn't have to look through the yellow pages. It was a very clear.
Exactly.
You also didn't have options. There were very few options, but it was built into the fabric of your community. It
was even literally built into the homes, because there were these things called coffin corners in homes. Do you know about them?
No.
They're insanely incredible. In Iowa City, I lived in a building that had them. Down staircases, right, which would have been very difficult to take a coffin down through, right? There were these sort of scores in the corners that would help them idle the box out and down out of the house.
Coffin corners. Wow.
Coffin corners, right. I mean, and Emily would look out her window, you know, and there would be a hearse going down the street drawn by horses. And, you know, death was really a part of their lives.
Yeah.
And it's so weirdly not a part of ours that we're almost becoming inhuman about it.
Yeah. So do you think that having a system for managing close deaths and for experiencing them as a child, experiencing them as a young adult, does that make us more sensitive to life, more sensitive to other people, or is that just another way of being? Are we, now we maybe just cremate people and just stick them in the river or whatever, but without, maybe you have a ceremony, maybe you don't, maybe you do it this, maybe now we have more options for how our family wants to do it. But maybe those options also create some gaps.
I don't know. I mean, every death to every family is incredibly important. But I guess what I'm saying is just, I don't know, maybe as a poet, I think about death all the time, daily. And I don't know if that's, good or bad, but I do think that having a relationship to death and burial that is as holistic as it seems to be, and there's some romanticizing going on in my brain, I'm sure, about death. I think it's crucial, and I'm bereft of it. I mean, I'm just thinking of burial practices such as these. Okay, in Neolithic, you'll find most of the bodies were first laid out and allowed to be skeletonized, right? So then what they would do, this weird way of thinking about it, they would take like all the femurs of all the dead and put all the femurs in one place.
So everybody goes back together. Everybody goes with everybody else.
Yeah, and it's sort of egalitarian too, right? There's a democratic sort of all of us are the same, right? So there's that kind of weird stacking of different body parts, but then there's incredible stuff like skeletons that have been revisited over maybe even 100 years, where wooden pegs have been placed to keep the bones together.
Oh.
So there are just many variations of death. That's a beautiful idea. And then in England, down south, where they've found these chimerical burials of animals. This is insane. Animals who have been sort of made into crazy creatures. The head of a sheep connected to the body of a horse with the hooves of a cow.
Laid out in the earth.
What was that about?
Yeah. What was that about?
I don't know. But I'm going to spend probably the rest of my life, thinking about it. And daydreaming, right, is the spice of life. Turns out. It turns out that's the best we get, and it's pretty good,
Yep. Interesting. So do you think that so I'm like, shall we keep talking about death, or should we talk about something else?
No, my students are like, they're so depressing. I'm like, well, you're 23. You don't even know what depressing is yet. Or 20 or 19 or however old you are,
So one question I did want to ask about students. So teaching young people is really interesting. And then thinking about this election we just had, also got me thinking about young people, because they came out and they voted, and they really rallied and showed up. And there's so much hope for our future, I think, in looking in the kids that I know, the kids I know personally, and the kids and my kids' friends, and things I hear about them, and the way they just behaved in the last election, and the way they protest, and the way they have values, and they speak their values, and they have a vision for the future. They're not lumps on logs.
No, they're not. And I can get very frustrated with them. Yeah. There are times when I go on Facebook and I'm like, oh, what the fucking hell? Like, sometimes they're bereft of thinking through stuff, I think. For example, I asked one class, what does Ash Wednesday mean, right? In New York City, there's this Wednesday comes along where everybody's walking around with ash smudged on their heads. Mm-hmm. It's always a shock, and if you're not Catholic, and then, what would that mean? And it was really difficult. They couldn't think through it. That ash, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. They weren't making those connections. but they are very sophisticated. That's the strange thing. It's like they're very sophisticated and evolved in some ways, and then kind of weirdly uneducated in other ways. And I really have found that parenting is key.
Parenting is key, I think.
It's really cool.
I found in students that you can see a generation of people who've grown up on devices and not reading books.
Oh.
I've seen the loss of books, and we'll see how this all plays out, because their spelling, their grammar, the apostrophe S or plural, not sure which. No, everything is apostrophe S. Wherever there's an S, it just becomes apostrophe S. But there is a loss. There's a loss with the loss of books. I mean, we haven't lost books yet, but they've been reduced in the lives of many young people.
Oh my God, absolutely. It's a real problem. It's a freaking nightmare, actually. For example, they don't know how to write a title. They don't understand the capitalizations of titles. And I'm like, of a chapter. I'm like, that's because you're not looking at books.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to tell you this. I shouldn't have to tell you really how to punctuate dialogue. If you were reading books, you would know. It's not but it's so much more than that. It's so much more than that. And what I've noticed is that we teach them now excerpts of things. I have never had students read an entire book until this semester. I decided in my Lit Crit class that is about landscape and home that we are going to read all of Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. Every word. I mean, they'll read 30% of it, but they must understand that a book is a book. It is a whole universe, right? And we can't just jump into it and like extract what we need and then get out and say like, oh, I understand.
Yeah.
So it's a disaster.
Early on in this conversation, you mentioned how contemporary poetry has a lot of images flashing, tick, 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 image, 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 and then the poem is over. And I think that things have sped up. And what you just said about just sort of going and extracting the thing you need. I mean, I do that all day long when I'm researching something. You just scam grab.
It's gross. It's gross.
It is a different. It certainly affects our brains to be using the digital world like that. So, and I think about this thing about sort of like the loss of long novels. I mean, obviously kids are still reading, right? Great literature, aren't they? I mean,
no.
I think
no.
Some of them are.
Some of them are. I would say the majority, like I always ask the question the first day of class, what was the last book or poem you read? And I would tell you that usually the first thing I hear is laughter.
Okay.
Laughter. And they, and then I'll get questions like, well, is a camera manual, does that count?
Yeah.
And these are my smartest kids. They're just, yes, some of them are like, I read Moby Dick last summer. And I'm like, whoa, can I talk to your parents? They're awesome. But those who don't have somebody saying reading really develops your brain. I try to say there's nothing like reading to work the synapses, to make you start daydreaming, to make you start thinking about other things. There's nothing like it.
Visualize. And so I would say that there's probably a lot, we could probably make a list right now, like the list of loss of growing up being like the loss of the voracious reader, right? Like kids who get lost in reading. But one loss is to just go in and visualize a world and to have it, to hold the visualization. And I think that is no small thing. That's not being entertained. It's not just sort of daydreaming. I think that being able to visualize and imagine is part of what's going to keep us going and move us to better days ahead if we humans can do that.
I agree with you 100%. 100%. This book, The Poetics of Space, which I'm not finding, talks again so much about the home as the place of dreaming, where we dream. And I often say this to the kids when they're, for example, when they're writing something creative versus when they're writing like an analytical paper, which barely happens. I say to them, your job here, the creative stuff, is to dream. You aren't to communicate. I'm not interested in communication. I'm interested in your dream life. I'm interested in dream logic, right? Mm-hmm. And how that gets at who you are.
Yeah.
Even if you don't read.
So during this lockdown, this year of COVID-19, I don't know about you, but I've been having crazy dreams. I've had this whole, and I do think it has something to do with the lockdown and just sort of that my life is so contracted. So when I dream, I'm going to really, really weird places.
I think you're allowed to do that because you're not in America. I think our dream lives have all been really screwed with the last 4 years. First of all, nobody has slept.
Yeah.
I cannot remember. I'm still, after 2 days of joy over the weekend, I'm back to it. I slept well for 2 nights, and now I'm back because our national selves are in such pain and such extremis, like who is the Regan who sleeps? I don't know who she is. I haven't seen her in a long time.
Do you think if you went to Orkney, you'd be able to sleep?
Yeah. Actually, weirdly, I definitely do. I know I would because, that's, I mean, there's I don't know how you feel about Maine. How do you feel about Maine, Hannah?
So I'm being asked this because I'm from Maine, from the state of Maine. I was born there. My mother lives there. My brother lives there. My family and friends, all the people who raised me, my small community. So how I feel about Maine is mostly totally positive, but
there's difficulty too, I'm sure. But I'm talking about like the landscape.
Oh, the landscape. Okay, so the landscape of Maine is profound. The ragged, rocky granite coast that has a geology and a history that goes back to the beginning of time. How I feel about Maine is that it is truly unlike anywhere else, except the wonderful thing is when I'm on the, in little bits of the coast of France, I'm like, this was connected to Maine.
Yes.
And other places too. And so it is unique. Maine is completely different from New Hampshire, which is right next to it. It's a different coast already. The coast of Maine is amazing in that it is so much push and pull and heat and crumbling and dissolving and building back up together, that we've got just this ragged coastline that's made up of long stretchy peninsulas and then peninsulas that broke off and turned into islands. So it's quite a place.
It really, I mean, I've been going there since I was little.
And you've been going to Deer Isle since you were little. Is that correct? Am I wrong?
Little Deer, but it's, now we slop over to Deer sometimes if we can't find find a place to rent.
I used to spend time there when I was a kid. I went to summer camp up there, but it is absolutely a place of dreams and a landscape of profound events. It's a place I definitely miss.
Well, I have to say that during, as my students call it, the COVID times, which I find adorable. Now that we're in the COVID times, I use Little Deer Isle. I'm a user of Little Deer Isle memories because that's the thing that saves me when I'm really losing it. I think, I
know 100% what you're talking about. And I will say that I begin every day with a daily meditation, and I sit down and I clear my thoughts, and I imagine myself sitting in the Camden Hills, looking across to Islesboro and that whole bay. Is that Penobscot Bay? I can't remember.
Penobscot freaking Bay.
But you can picture exactly what I'm talking about. And that is where I start. And then I do other things in my meditation.
Isn't that interesting? I mean,
that isn't where I thought, oh, what's a pretty place I know I can. That is a place that came to me as the place of absolute sort of centered peace.
That's it. And I didn't grow up there. I just was there in the summers, right? But the experience was so profound there as a child, being, you know, as we have to say, in nature. You know, well, we were there communing with nature. I've never gotten over that coastline. I've never gotten over finding, you know, I still have my sea urchins from the 70s.
Yeah.
And save all that shit. I have I have like a sea urchin that's this big from 1974.
Oh, wow.
And last, 2 years ago when we were there, me and my husband, boyfriend, we found 3 arrowheads on the beach on Eggemogan Reach. I mean, that stuff I live for, right? Because that's collapsing of time. I have, I'm holding these arrowheads. I don't know. It was an incredible experience, and a little sad too.
And why was it sad?
Because, I mean, come on, we just destroyed those people.
Yeah.
You know, we really came in and they had a Paleolithic lifestyle. My students are often talking about lifestyles. It's so hilarious. I'm like, well, the American, I wouldn't say it's a lifestyle. I mean, it is, but not the way you're thinking about it, you know?
Right.
Like a choice lifestyle.
Yeah. It's so funny when people say, you know, oh, America, you know, there's East Coast, West Coast, mid you know, the middle states, it's this, it's that. And it's so much more than that. And it really bugs me when people describe America as this simple place because of exactly what you're talking about. The Paleolithic lifestyle that's underneath the whole thing. So that is there, and that is the truth. That is a truth that is a massive story, and we squished it into a teeny tiny little chapter, right? That's not a chapter.
It's the fucking foundation. Yeah,
right.
It's not a chapter. Right, and it's like everything began with Squanto for us.
Right.
You know, and Squanto, my God, what was going on? I mean, internally, in his soul. I don't know. I mean, I don't hate to bash Americans. I just didn't grow up revering what we are. I'm not a patriot, right?
What we are is so much more than what people say we are. What we are is super complicated and actually kind of interesting. And, you know, people, oh, Americans, you're so conservative. Well,
not me.
Some are like, or you're so just to sum it up. And that's the problem with politics right now is that we've got this kooky two-party system that requires extreme behavior in order to capture a particular market of votes. And they can't run on platforms they can't run on complicated platforms. They have to have very simple platforms that can capture certain voters that they know will harness certain electoral votes. The whole thing is kooky. And one thing about the state of Maine that they did this year is they ran the elections using ranked voting, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but if we had ranked voting in the US, it would change the platforms that people could vote on, and it could change how people vote. Because what you do is you get a list of candidates and you put them in order of how you want them. Your number 1 choice, your number 2 choice, your number 3 choice, and so on. And so if one candidate gains over 50% of the votes, then they win. But if nobody gets over 50% of the votes, they chuck the lowest, I don't know, 50% or the lowest third or some number. Maybe they keep the top 3 and get rid of the rest. And then of all the candidates that they're getting rid of the rest, they take their number 2 votes. And the number 2s then get put in the mill and count. And so And
Huh.
so what's happening is the numbers that come up are based on how people really feel about more complicated things. So you don't have to vote because it's the worst, it's the least of two evils or whatever.
Right.
You could vote for a third party candidate that
Get
way.
more people voting too.
And yeah, and it would allow for more complexity of candidates. So it's something to look into. Ranked voting. So hopefully we can come to this, because the way we run our elections in the U.S. is absurd and it's grotesque, and the candidates that get offered up.
And we cannot take it anymore.
No.
I mean, I have to say, I'm in love with Biden right now, but it's like a romantic, just crazy, crazy moment of love, right? Because, some things he's done really kind of bug me.
1,000%.
But Jesus, when he spoke the other night and Kamala spoke, I don't know, how can you not see that as just a beautiful moment in America? I mean, Harris, that's the greatest thing. I can barely get to it, because I'm all of the other goo, but that's a really, beautiful moment of progress.
It's pretty cool. Hopefully it will stay cool. I mean, hopefully it can be better than what we imagine it could be.
I don't know what to say. I just, sometimes I think we need like a giant land saw.
To do what?
Maybe just cut this place in half. If we're that at odds,
yeah.
I don't know how we're ever going to agree that racism is bad. If we can't agree now, when are we ever going to agree?
It's even more complicated than that, because of the thinking and the lying. People. It's not like the people that are I'm pro-racist. People don't speak of
themselves. No, they don't say that, right? No.
They've got a whole other thing of behavior, and then people who are anti-racist, well, they have some issues too. So
yes, we're
complicated people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a poet, so when things get like this, I just want to look at like a dried out seed pod. And that's all I really want to do.
Yeah.
The world of man is kind of difficult to navigate.
The what?
World of man, our man-made world is very, and I don't mean buildings, I mean, the community that we've made, whatever. It's just very, very difficult. And I'm never let down by the plants. I have to say, never. Every day I go out, something new happens.
Yeah, they're super consistent. They're going through their cycles, and we're like, as you said, not even noticing.
And what's really amazing about them too is I have up on my wall somewhere a plant root chart.
Oh.
Obviously what we're seeing is just 1/2, maybe even 1/4 of the plant. Their roots can be 3 feet long. Like common dandelion has this insane, complex, sophisticated system underneath it that we can't see. And usually those parts are white, right? Colorless, because they're underground.
Yeah.
It's phenomenology, it's just phenomenology. That's all I say to my students. I'm like, just be a phenomenologist. You'll
I love that word, because as a non-scientist, I always had a trouble, I have difficulty remembering scientific language and processes. So I can't explain anything scientifically. I don't know why there's gravity or the sun. I don't know why anything, but I love the metaphors that I extract from the natural world. That is how I use the natural world, is to extract metaphors. But I forget what I was going to say.
That's what happens when you're talking and talking.
I know, we've been talking for a while. Oh, this is what I was going to say, is that so the root system is this gorgeous, like branched thing that we can't see. But what also we can't see, and I can't describe it in scientific terms, but I know it's true because I've been told, is that plants talk to each other as well. And so if one plant is in danger, they will send out like pheromones or something that the other plants can pick up on. And so, for example, if there's a tree and there's an elephant eating the bark on the tree, that tree is in danger, and it will send out a message to the other trees nearby of the same family, and that those trees will get a bitter taste in their bark, so that when an elephant goes over there, they won't touch those trees because they've been protected. And so the trees as a group don't get all eaten by all the elephants. Stuff like that. But there's like millions of things like that where there is this connection between all of us, between everything and our survival. And we're experiencing something right now with COVID-19. We're experiencing it just on this sort of textbook level. Like our governments are in disarray and people are very afraid and the hospitals are having to deal with this issue. But there's something big and invisible also that we need to manage. I think one of the issues is meat, that we shouldn't be so involved in eating meat and keeping live animals around.
Well, no. I found myself maybe 10 years ago trying to cook chicken breasts, and I stood there over the pan holding this breast, just crying.
Oh.
I was done. I mean, I've gone through periods of vegetarianism, but it might not surprise anybody that I wake up some mornings and my first thought is of a slaughterhouse. Like that, I know a slaughterhouse is at work somewhere right at that moment. That that the terror and fear of those animals. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm turning into a real poet girl right now, but
Go for it.
I cannot handle it. I cannot handle animal cruelty.
Yeah.
And
it isn't
I can't, for 1 second, I cannot take it. And because they're bewildered, they didn't do anything. And I think, to see people bewildered is really one of the saddest visions of a person. We were just reading the swimmer in my lit crit class at Pratt, and there's that incredible moment where Nettie, the protagonist, who's this supposedly virile, moneyed, conqueror of all things, is seen on the side of the highway, trying to get across the highway to get to his next pool as he swims home. And he's on the side of the highway, and Cheever describes how people saw him in cars driving by, that, they didn't see Nettie Merrill, the champion swimmer. They saw Nettie Merrill disheveled, bewildered, confused, cold, diminished, right? And it's such a devastating portrait, I think. And in the 21st century, we ask in classes like this, do we feel badly for Nettie Merrill? How do we feel about Nettie? Nettie's friends with a bunch of dickheads, right? Nettie's friends with all the rich people in this town. He's only friends with them. He makes hierarchies between, there's a hierarchical system where he lives. He's at the top of it. There are no African Americans, there are no people of color in the story. There's a lot to really, really dislike about Nettie Merrill, let alone the last name Merrill, right? The money, the American money, and all that. But Cheever gives us this freaking gift where we see someone who we don't, especially now, really have much sympathy for, as bewildered. And I just think that idea about bewildered, a soul that's bewildered, is the saddest thing to me. An old man alone, a bewildered soul, a bewildered animal. That I think we can all connect, right, at some level, and feel empathy. Some of my students were not having it at all, and I was like, fair enough, fine. You don't feel for Nettie Merrill, that's fine. I feel for Nettie Merrill.
So do you think that we are in a global state of bewilderment globally or nationally?
Jesus, I mean, I'm a poet. I don't really know anything about anything. I would say that we are, though. I think that it's felt to me since I've been alive that there is some kind of disconnect between meaning and life at this point. And I think that bewilders a lot of people. I've been bewildered, but I'm lucky because I have art, you know? And again, I have no freaking idea what I would make of this mess if I didn't have art. I mean, Marion Moore says, you know, it is a privilege to see this much confusion. And, you know, that's just how I think about it. You know, it's a privilege. But I don't know, life's a dream, Hannah.
Yeah. Isn't it? So, well, that is a great place to sort of end this conversation, but I think we'll probably be picking this up more. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for spending time with me, talking to me today. And this was great. I always enjoy our conversations. And we didn't even get to talk about your work.
Hey, better.
Next time.
Okay, next time.
But what I am going to do is put some links in the chat area for anybody who's interested in doing a little bit more research about your excellent work. And so what I've put in the chat is a link to the Family Teeth that you just published, which was a beautiful story about your dad. And I put in a link to your essay, your photo essay on the murals.
Oh, great.
Examining modern slavery. And I put a link to your website where people can find your books and purchase them. And
I'll give them away. I'm really not.
T-shirts? Do you have to sell T-shirts? Do you sell mugs? Do you have a
baseball hat? There are some mugs. There's a lot of really great mouse pads with my poem printed on them, and there's some caps.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Good. So, well, thank you so much. And if anybody has any questions for Regan, either ask them now or send her a note or send me. I don't know. And Andre Mook says, ask her back, Hannah. Okay. So
thank you, Andre. I'm looking at Bruce Judson, who says, our cat died and I dug a grave, gathered a bunch of flowers, laid her head to the east, covered her with flowers. Thank you, Bruce. Oh my God, you know, even freaking Neanderthals would put flowers near their dead. Oh. I mean, and that's incredibly beautiful. Flowers at graves, very insanely important and deep. Yeah. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Yeah, and so thank you guys, for those of you who have listened to part of our chat or all of our chat or are here just at the end, thanks for coming. This was a blast. We're definitely going to pick this up and do this again because we've just scratched the surface. Meow, meow, meow.
Gotta love the kitty cats.
Well, have a great day, everybody. And
you guys get to have dinner. I have to like go back to grading.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.